Good morning and welcome to Houston Newsmakers in a week when a lot has been happening during what is normally a slow period. Congresswoman Lizzie Fletcher is my special guest now through 6 months of her first term representing the 7th Congressional District. Good morning. How's it been going?
Good morning, Khambrel. It's been going great.
Yeah, busy, I bet.
It's been busy. It's been an incredibly productive first 6 months in office.
So when you went in, how have you adjusted and how did you determine what your priorities were going to be?
Well, I am very fortunate that I put together a terrific team from the outset. I have a lot of Houstonians working in my office in Washington, and so that helps make sure that we understand our district's priorities and needs, and I've set my priorities based on the priorities of this district. So I asked to serve on 2 committees, the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee and on the Science, Space, and Technology Committee. And on those committees, I work on things that really matter in our district. And so that's where I spend a lot of my time. On the Science Committee, I sit on the Energy Subcommittee, and I'm the chair of the Environment Subcommittee. And then on Transportation and Infrastructure, I'm working on things where we oversee FEMA and the Army Corps of Engineers. I'm also on the Railroads and Pipelines Subcommittee. So a lot of issues that matter to our economy, to our safety, and to the issues that people are concerned about in the 7th Congressional District and across Greater Houston.
And your district has traditionally been a Republican district. So when you win in that district, do you find that you need to be less progressive in order to make sure that your constituents are more, is that kind of why you won? Because you didn't come off as a hardcore far left progressive wacko?
Well, I think
You know what I mean? I mean, sometimes people will look at people and say far right crazy, far left crazy. You're in the middle.
Well, and I think that's where the district is. And I do think that that's why I won, because what we want is to have people representing us in Congress who are willing to listen to both sides, to work on both sides, to understand where people are coming from, and to try to build consensus and actually move things forward. And, you know, I practiced law for a dozen years before I got this job. And as a lawyer, you learn to argue both sides, and you understand that there are always at least 2, if not more sides. And so I think that that is an important part of governing, and I think that it's what people in this district want to see. When I describe our district to people in Washington, I say we don't think government is always the answer, but we don't think it's always the problem. What we want is government that is efficient, effective, and ethical. And that is kind of the prism through which I set my priorities and that I look at the issues that come before me.
And once you got there, I'm sure one of the most eagerly awaited moments, whether you wanted it to be or not, was the release of the Mueller report. That report on the investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election, it was starkly different along party lines. The president, of course, was claiming no collusion, no obstruction. Democrats said, hold on a minute, that's not exactly what the report said. What was your conclusion from that report, and how have you kind of evolved from the time that report has been released?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things, and you're right, there was a stark difference in the response, and I think people who've actually read the report have grave concerns. And the report's divided into 2 sections. One is the Russian election interference, and there's actually bipartisan agreement. There was an interesting article a couple weeks ago. What do we need to do coming out of it? And even within the Texas delegation, there's bipartisan agreement that we need to secure our elections. And just this week in Congress, we passed the SAFE Act to try to ensure election security of our voting systems and make sure that everyone is able to cast their ballot.
Is that something that'll get through the Senate, or is that something that's still being blocked by Senator McConnell?
Well, we just passed it this week. I am very optimistic. It should pass the Senate. Every American should agree. And Robert Mueller said this in his very brief press conference. Every American should be concerned about the integrity of our elections. We don't need foreign governments interfering in our elections, and we need to do everything we can to secure them. This is the foundation of our country and our society, is that each of us gets a vote, and we have a say in the decisions that are made and the people who make them. So I think that that's a critical piece. And I do think there was a difference. It's not entirely partisan, but there is a difference in how people see the second half of the report outlining potential obstruction of justice. And what the Mueller report said is that they did not make any determinations about that, and it's up to Congress to do it. And what I hear from my constituents overwhelmingly is that they want Congress to do its job and to do investigating. Okay,
now as you say that, in Congress now, anytime there's a subpoena issued or the information that tries to be obtained from the executive branch, you're being stonewalled. So
Absolutely.
What is your response to that, and how do you get around that?
Well, it's incredibly frustrating to see this stonewalling, and I come at this as a lawyer. lawyer. Now, our entire system is predicated on voluntary compliance with the rule of law. It means that people who live in Houston who get a subpoena or a jury summons for that matter, people watching this morning know that they are required to comply with the legal process, whether or not they're involved and whether or not they think that it's relevant. People engage, and we count on that. And so what we need to do is get the information and get to the truth. And I see the Mueller report as kind of the brief that you would have before a trial, but we need the evidence, we need to see the facts, we need to see the actual documents to make decisions and determinations, and to prevent witnesses from coming, to prevent people from providing information and documents is deeply, deeply troubling. And it should trouble everyone, because we all do that, and our system, civil and criminal justice system, depends on voluntary compliance. And nobody, even the president, is above the law.
I know this is going to be a continuing issue going forward, and you will do what you think is most important. Right now, the immigration issue back on the front burner once again, and that is something that affects all of us in Texas, particularly more so than it does other parts of the country. Now, most recently, the decision has been made to pass legislation to give money to help take care of the children, and I mean that's the underlying reason given for all of that. What's your sense on where things are going now as far as immigration is concerned, and what kind of solutions there may be?
Well, what is...
It's a big question.
No, it's okay. I mean, it is a big question, but the truth is there are a lot of good answers out there, and a lot of people have been working on them for a long time. We need comprehensive immigration reform. There are so many issues that emerge in our incredibly complicated immigration system, and a lot of ideas have been floated out that people agree with or excited about, that are bipartisan ideas. In 2013, there was the Gang of Eight bill that had wide bipartisan support, passed the Senate, couldn't get through the House. The House wouldn't take it up for years. Now what we see is a real different tone in the administration, but what we are doing in the House, we passed, and I was an original co-sponsor of the Dream and Promise Act, to provide legal status and a path to citizenship for Dreamers, people who were born here, who were brought here as children and raised here, and this is the only home that they know, as well as TPS recipients, many of whom have been living in our community, especially in Houston, for many, many years. And I think it's really important that we focus on the places where we can make progress, but those are starts. There are many more issues, and we hear it from, there's a huge group that is willing to engage on this topic, and you see it especially in Houston. We're a city of immigrants. You know, we know that our city is continuing to grow with immigrants from around our country and around the rest of the world. And you know, we have one of the highest refugee resettlement populations in the world, and we see that as a benefit here. We also know that there are people living here who have family, who have a need for other, workers in their businesses to be able to come here, and we don't have a system that's working for those who are trying to operate within it.
With the way the partisan divide is, and it's very distinct and really deep, what is the challenge? How optimistic can you be going forward that there will be something that will be decided? Because it does not look optimistic. Well,
I am more optimistic than you might think. What I experience in Congress on a daily basis is actually a lot of bipartisan agreement. And for example, just this week, I introduced my first bill in the House a couple of months ago, and am now it just passed our committee on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, and it was a priority to me because it is a bill that helps state and local municipalities begin disaster mitigation and flood mitigation projects without some of the red tape that they've experienced. It's what the city of Houston and Harris County told me when I took office has been one of the biggest impediments for them in starting some of these mitigation projects.
And on that point, let's stop for just a second. Okay. We're going to continue. We'll talk more about that in depth and detail coming up right after this. Glad to have Lizzie Fletcher here today. We're going to talk more about the bill that just passed. The hurdles cleared in getting that much needed hurricane relief money for our region. That's when Houston Newsmakers continues. Well, to many of us, it may not seem like it, but it's been almost 2 years since Hurricane Harvey hammered the Houston region. It's taken about that long to secure what many think is a proper amount of funding to help this community become whole again. We've gotten some, but Some more certainly is needed in some areas. As a member of the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, you were part of the unanimous bipartisan vote to come out of the committee about getting disaster funding. Talk about what that means. It looks good on paper. What does it mean in actuality?
Sure. So there are a couple of things. We have been fighting to get the funds for Houston and Texas and those recovering from Hurricane Harvey that Congress appropriated that are tied up in red tape in the administration. It's tied up in the HUD department, and we have been pushing in a bipartisan way. Our delegation has been working, but I really have taken it on to lead the charge on that because that is a priority for my constituents. There are people who are still afraid that it's going to rain, just like it did 2 years ago, and they don't see that anything has changed. And we have got to address that problem. So we're continuing to fight for our money. And then my bill, the HELP bill, which passed out of our Transportation Infrastructure Committee, will also help loosen the ability for cities to have access to money to start projects sooner without jeopardizing their ability to get federal funding. And what I'm so proud of about that is that not only did I have Republican co-sponsors who helped me introduce the legislation, but when we voted on it in committee, there was wide support across the country and among both parties. It passed unanimously out of my committee. And I see that in Congress again. It's not what you see on TV a lot of times, but in both of my committees, we're passing a lot of legislation out of committee on a bipartisan and often unanimous basis.
We were talking before we start taping about the fact that 6 months in, you're basically 25% into your term, as you got a lot of stuff you're doing and a lot of stuff you're trying to get done. But also, in the meantime, there are people out there who say, well, we don't like the fact that our district was flipped. And so there are people starting to get together to run against you. How much attention do you pay to that? You know what's going on? Is it a slight buzz in the background? How does that impact anything that you're doing?
Well, of course I know that there are people who want this job, and I understand why. This job is an incredible opportunity to be of service to this community, and it's an incredible privilege. So I'm not surprised that other people want it. I'm really focused on doing the best job I can with the time that I have, and hopefully by next November people will be convinced and understand that I'm the best person for this job and that I'm committed to this city and this community and our values and making sure that they're reflected in Washington and that we have a real influence in Washington. And that's what I've been working on, really engaging, especially amongst the caucus, but with the entire Congress on issues that matter in this community, talking about what our energy future looks like. There's a lot of talk about energy and what the future is going to be in Washington, and I think that we in the energy capital of the world need to be leading and driving that conversation. And so I've really worked to engage on that. I'm the co-chair of the Natural Gas Caucus. I've also been working on trade issues, which is critically important in Houston, and I'm a member of the New Democrat Coalition, which is a centrist group within the Democratic Party, and there I co-chair the Trade Task Force. So really working on issues that matter to Houston. Staying busy.
Well, that's good. It keeps you out of trouble. Okay, so the Supreme Court, and by the way, we're going to do Newsmakers Extra because we have a lot to talk about. Newsmakers Extra is going to be a part of this as well, so you can go to click2houston.com and get more information there. The Supreme Court said, you know what, you can't put that census question. You can't ask about your citizenship on the census. What are your thoughts about that? I think the Democrats were typically in agreement that that's something that should not have happened.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely the right thing to happen. It is in the Constitution that we have a census, and the census drives so much of what we do. And Texas really stands to lose with that question, with people not fully engaging with the census takers, because we've had so many people moving to Texas, and so much is apportioned out of the results of the census. So we stand to gain more members of Congress who will be able to bring Texas's voice to the Congress. We stand to gain, the estimates are 2 to 3 seats in the Congress, and all sorts of financial decisions are made and allocated based on our population. So it's critical that we have an accurate count across the country. And anything that discourages people from participating, which this question appears not only to have the effect of doing, but to be designed to do, is deeply problematic.
We've got more to talk about. I want to talk about Supreme Court on gerrymandering. Not such a good decision from your standpoint, at least Democrat standpoint, and much more. Iran is now in the news as well. The president is talking about some things there, and much more. We're going to do that coming up on Newsmakers Extra. Congresswoman Lizzie Fletcher, thank you for being here this morning.
Thank you so
Good
much
luck as you continue to work on behalf of your constituents.
Thank you.